Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Ramy here, and today what we're going to talk about is whether or not it's worth it to attend an expensive private college, Ivy League college, versus a much cheaper state school. So for those of you that don't know, I am a professor. I've been a professor now for 11 years. I have a PhD. I've worked in the corporate world as a management consultant. I've worked in higher education. I've worked in K-12 education. I've worked as a government contractor. I've worked for Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, some large ones, in various places like DC, New York. That's just to give you a little bit about my background if you don't know me, just so you know that I do have some experience interviewing, hiring people, firing people, getting people jobs as a professor, and hiring people in corporate and letting people go and looking through all those different resumes and seeing like what really matters when I'm looking at a resume. Okay. And this is a question like, I had to ask myself when I was going to school, and I helped my siblings and cousins and family members and friends out and just people all the time. What is the return on investment, and when is it worth it? I've already done videos on how to go to college expensive and cheap and stuff like that, but this one really focuses on, is that private school worth it? So let me give you some very simple, like the quick and dirty answer is Ivy League school, always worth it. Regular private school, probably not. State school, probably always. Does that even make sense? Because I just said Ivy League, always state. Okay, so let's explain what I'm meaning, because, I'm not, that probably doesn't make sense to you. So let's explain what I mean there. Okay, so first of all, let's start at the top. Ivy League, when is it worth it? If you can get into an Ivy League school, it is probably always, always, always worth the return on investment. Let's explain why. So my friends that are at Ivy League schools, that went to Ivy League schools, like whenever they're introduced for something, they're always introduced as, hey, he went to Yale or Princeton or Harvard. Even though they might have went there 20 years ago. Like, are you introduced based on where you went to college? They're introduced as that, and then that means people automatically assume that they're brilliant. And they may be. I have some very brilliant friends that went to these elite schools, but I also have friends that went to these schools that got in for various other reasons, not because of their brains. Not that they weren't smart as well, but there are other reasons to get in. So if you can get into an Ivy League college, it is always usually worth it. I'll give you another example. So when I was a management consultant, the salaries were about 40% higher for people starting as a management consultant. That went to an Ivy League school. 40% higher. Additionally, when I was hiring people, whenever we had seen someone went to an Ivy League school, we would probably just give them the interview because they had went to that school, because we were curious about them. We were just curious about that person. We knew, wow, they got into an Ivy League school. That's impressive. This person deserves an interview. Would help get them interviews. It also gives prestige. And let's talk about one of the biggest things it gives you. It opens up the world to you. All the people that you knew there, your friends that you made and you went to school with, now become resources for the rest of your life. What does that mean? That means I need a good lawyer. Well, I'm going to go with my friend who went to Harvard, that I'm friends with, who went on to law school, who is a very powerful person now. I need a good doctor. Same thing. Those kind of, or someone in tech, someone in finance. I have a very well-connected people who have families that are well-connected, and there's lots of interconnectedness happening there where I can pull in those resources when I need to. Additionally, like even look at like Mark Zuckerberg. Would he have created Facebook if he didn't go to Harvard? Probably not, because he got the idea there, took it, the story. Other people, Bill Gates. Bill Gates was a genius. These were geniuses, obviously, didn't need to go to college to get where they were, but it did help them. Bill Gates met his partners who helped him start Microsoft at Harvard University. And the list goes on with those kind of people. So yes, there are some great things about going to these schools that make it very worthwhile. So that's Ivy League. Ivy League is usually always worth it. Let's go to private and public, because this is where it gets a little more sticky. Now, some of those things that I said about Ivy League do apply to private and some don't. Like let's say you went to a private school in the middle of nowhere. No one's going to introduce you as this person went to blah, blah, blah school. I'm not going to use any examples, but no one's going to introduce you if you went to some small private school. So there's that. Are you going to get a better job because you went to a private school? That is it depends. So like there are some these private schools that are considered like elite private schools that are well known in a certain area. So like a school could be well known in finance or something like that and help you get a job maybe in New York City. But let's say you were to travel to like San Francisco and apply to jobs and having went to that school. Is it going to help you? The people in San Francisco might be like, we've never heard of this college before. And then what do? You spent $60K a year to go to a school that no one in San Francisco has heard of. So maybe it wasn't worth it in that case. So when you're selecting these kind of private schools, I would recommend you go there for a very specific reason, unless you have no problem affording the amount that it is. It's generally not worth the return on investment unless you can make that justification. Let me say that again. Unless you can make the justification, it's usually not worth the return on investment, especially if you're going to go into a field like teaching or something where your college is not going to make too much of a difference. It's way not going to matter. But you have to remember, like if you're going to an awesome private school in the Northeast, across the country, they probably haven't heard of it unless it has some kind of big name. So make sure you're aware of that kind of stuff, because I did watch that people go through those kind of scenarios. I've had family members go through those exact scenarios. They were going to spend, $60,000 a year on a school that I was like, I'm not sure anyone's really heard of that school. Is it going to really help you meet your end goals better than X state school? The one thing you might get at those private schools is that people going there are probably more connected than the people going to the state schools. So in that regard, you are going to probably meet a better, group who's has a much higher chance of being successful. Okay, so now let's talk about the state schools. So in my opinion, if you're not going to Ivy League, you probably look at the state schools. And some of the state schools have huge names and good reputations. They're just significantly less money. And when I talk about significantly less money, just tuition alone at some of these private schools is like $50,000 to $60,000. $50,000 for just tuition. Tuition at my university is like $8,000 a year. You're probably going to graduate a state college with you might owe, let's say you just took out loans and didn't pay it at all. You're probably going to have what you would pay for a car. That's your return on investment. The amount you would buy a car for is probably what you're going to owe. It's really not a bad thing. What I usually tell people when you're figuring out the return on investment on college, when you're choosing your major, is your first year salary going to equal the amount of loans that you're going to have when you're done? That's how you figure out the ROI. If it's like, whoa, I'm going to be a teacher and make like $40,000 a year, but I'm going to owe like $200,000, the return on investment is not there. But if you're like, you know what, I'm going to this school because I want to be an investment banker, the average investment banker is making, $200,000 a year, and I'm going to be taking out $200,000 a year, and that school's going to get me that job, it's probably well worth it. So that's when you start doing these calculations and figuring this out. But in general, for most people, the state school is going to have the better value because, let me just tell you this, education at Harvard versus state school is really not much of a difference. It's not like when I was applying as a professor, when I'm applying to professor jobs, I'm applying to Harvard, private schools, state schools, and I'll get hired somewhere and I'm going to be teaching the same classes at any of those schools. So it did not make a difference if I was at the Harvard teaching my instructional design or esports classes, or I was at community college teaching those instructional design. I'm probably teaching very similar courses. So it's not like the education's any different. It's not like you get a better education. You get a lot more stuff at a Ivy League school, as I explained earlier. But that stuff isn't necessarily a better learning experience. So keep that kind of stuff in mind when you're considering like what kind of college should you go to, because it can make a difference. And some of those things really did matter and some didn't. And that's where you have to weigh this balance of what do you want? What do you or your kid or whoever you're watching this video for, what do they want to do? Is it worth that return on investment? You really have to think about that. Don't get boggled down in the, well, I live in this state and this school is really well known. Ask yourself, is this school really well known 5 states away? What are they saying about it? Because that helps you narrow down like whether it's really worth that return and what am I looking to get out of this education? Those are some questions you really have to ask yourself that really can help you answer this question. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.